That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about Deliver Us. It's technically not a directorial debut.
It made me think of that kid who says he's delivered. I don't like men's no more.
Delivered.
Anyway, it's not a directorial debut.
Well, it's co-directed by Ennis, who technically his debut, and Roy Kunz, who on his own has directed 2 other features, and I believe it was co-written by one of Mr. Kunz's siblings, Kane. Magnet Films is releasing it September 29th, 2023. It premiered at this year's Popcorn Frights Film Festival.
And you're not familiar with either of these directors' works?
No.
Okay, Deliver Us. When a nun in a remote convent claims immaculate conception, the Vatican sends a team of priests to investigate, concerned about an ancient prophecy that a woman will give birth to twin boys, one the Messiah, the other the Antichrist. What's your pull quote?
The power of this Christ is not compelling me in this sluggish Christploitation dud, which has nothing new to say or do outside of its limited nomenclature.
My pull quote, Deliver Us starts off with a bang, but quickly becomes a slog that seems more concerned with style over storytelling. I didn't care for this one.
You can get my Omen reference?
Yeah.
Okay.
The story is pretty much what the IMDb premise is. So this nun...
Sister Julia, played by Maria Vera Ratti, who when I see her name, my brain says Maria Varia.
Yeah, you said Maria Varia. We see her in a convent and...
In St. Petersburg, Russia.
In Russia, and she's like standing in front of the cross or something, gets the stigmata, and the next thing we know, we're with another like cardinal who has now called in sexy priest, who's played by...
Father Fox, played by Roy Kunz.
And Leroy, he is telling his boss, I don't want to preach no more because I got some lady pregnant and I would rather be a good dad than a good Christian, I guess. Mm-hmm. So he says I'd rather be a good Christian than a good priest, or he says something.
I'd rather be a good Christian than a bad priest.
That's right. But his boss is like, well, can you at least do this one last thing for me? There's this nun over here talking about she is pregnant with twins, one the Messiah, one the Antichrist, and she's saying it's immaculate conception. Mm-hmm. So sexy priest goes over there. Mm-hmm. And then there's this whole prophecy thing. So the opening of the film that starts out with a bang is that we see a group of people being decapitated, disrobed, and then on these nude bodies we see that they have these elaborate tattoos on their backs that are cut out Silence of the Lambs style.
Yeah, their skin is flayed off,
sewn together, and it creates this like portrait that's like a story that's telling of the prophecy. And the prophecy is basically that these...
Yep.
Yeah.
A Zoroastrian prophecy, and we see Thomas Kretschmann as this one-eyed priest that's involved in these murders, who later pops up in modern time to chase down Sister Julia.
And it's important to know the prophecy is like before Christ. Mm-hmm. So this one-eyed priest who works at the convent,
Father Saul,
he is in... So the sexy priest goes, meets the lady, she's talking her shit, then sexy priest walks in on the one-eyed priest having a full-on, like, what would you call that?
There's going to be a sacrificial ritual. And then there's another cardinal played by Alexander Siddig that is involved. And Siddig and Father Saul are basically arguing whether they should let these babies live, because it's not the right time for the Messiah and the Antichrist to make another appearance on earth.
So the one-eyed priest wants to kill the babies.
Yes.
But the other priest, he's saying, no, let's go. So sexy priest, the nun, and the other priest, the cardinal, they flee to Estonia, and they're holed up in some cabin
that is owned by Laura, played by Juane Kimmel, who is the pregnant
girlfriend,
wife of Father Fox.
Weird stuff is happening there, very like vague, generic weird stuff, and then we see that within this cabin there's a history of like the grandfather who owned the house that is vague, and then we see that there are portraits within the house that are also depicting this prophecy because the nun keeps telling Sexy Priest, we are meant to be together and raise these two badass, good ass kids. I don't know.
And they start having shared wet dreams.
We need to get to that. But Laura, she's also pregnant, like you mentioned, and she ends up losing her baby, which then manifests as this like little blonde girl trying to show images. And then everything culminates with the father, the Sexy Priest guy, realizing that the prophecy is true. So then he's like, we need to kill.
He goes full-blown Jack Nicholson in The Shining, kind of.
Like literally, chopping down a door with an axe, talking about Sexy Priest is here.
Cuckoo, what is he?
But yeah, something like that. But so it culminates with him trying to kill the Antichrist baby. Like he's holding it over a cliff and he's going to drop it.
Because he claims he knows which baby's evil.
And the nun shoots and kills him. But then the baby, one of them, brings him back to life. And they just take their asses back home. And he's like, well, I guess we got to raise these kids.
And now they're Jesus, Mary, Joseph, and Beelzebub.
The end. This, I don't know.
I thought this was a very dull film.
I think it looks cool.
Yeah, it was shot by Isaac Bauman, and who did an Ariana Grande music video, I forget which one. But yeah, they made really good use of their Estonian locations. It looks pretty good.
It reminds me of a film we reviewed called The Devil Conspiracy.
Yeah.
That kind of has a similar-ish plot where this woman is forced to carry the devil's baby, but then we find out that the entire movie is them trying to stop it, and then we find out that Jesus wants her to have the baby. But this movie feels like that in the sense that like it's almost like the filmmaker had access to resources and like shooting locations, so they built a story around that. But then what we end up with, it just feels like scenes put together that I was never really fully, it didn't feel like we were on a journey.
Yeah, there's
Like-
no horror, anxiety, dread.
Literally, I don't understand what the consequences are of these two kids.
It's just that we have to have a balance of good and evil, and that's
Yeah.
the way the good Lord wanted it. And why don't these people realize that finally?
That's the only part of the story that was clear to me, is that you have to have good and evil. But I don't know what happens. So if they live, like, is the world going to end, or are we going to live peacefully with these two? There just seems to be no consequence. Even the one-eyed priest and his sacrificial thing, it just all feels kind of like crazy and slapped together.
There are several too many dream sequences of no consequence. That's always, I feel like random dream sequences where like the main character's having a nightmare. It has to be very, like, we have to be delving into subtext. Otherwise, it feels like we're just wasting time until the next event in the script happens.
I agree. It feels like the story couldn't manage that, so then they just find an excuse to show something cool to kind of make us feel like something's happening. But, it's just a nightmare. And there are like four?
There are several.
Four? Including the sex dream.
Yes. And then I think you and I were both commenting there, an awful lot of breasts on display, including, why is baby Satan abusing his mother's nipple? I mean, don't she need the milk? Don't she need her to supply the milk?
Yeah, we see a lot of women's breasts, so I was like, well, isn't that crappy? And then we never see male nudity. But at the very end, we do see Sexy Priest nude. So he does get kudos for at least sharing, because he ends up being more nude than the women are.
Yeah.
So that's nice to see.
Interesting, although it seems like it's all for naught. It's kind of like that Ben Affleck penis shot.
It does feel like what was the point of them being naked?
Okay.
But, okay. Just going through my notes. The casting is interesting because there are a lot of very good-looking people in this movie that don't seem to, like, I don't know. I found it distracting because Sexy Priest, he looks to me like if you mix Jared Leto and Chris Evans and then throw in a little bit of
Casey Affleck.
He's kind of too good looking. And then the way he talks sounds like he lives in Venice and buys his groceries at Erewhon. And it's just weird that he's like in Russia as a priest who does exorcisms, who's kind of tired of it. Because the way he speaks is in stark contrast to
Maria Vera.
Well, and the Cardinal, who's his acting's like he's in community theater kind of versus sexy priest who's playing it too cool for school, and then Maria Vera, she's like in a different movie too.
Alexander Siddig is a very notable actor who's Sudanese and British, been in lots of things.
I'm not saying his acting's bad. It's just his style feels very different from sexy priest versus the crazy ass nun versus the blonde, who I did like her.
I did. She's Estonian, Juane. She looks like the Estonian Jennifer Lawrence, Haley Bennett, giving me all kinds of very beautiful, much more screen presence, I'd say, than Maria Vera or Ratti.
I agree, but the four leads feel like they're in very different movies.
Oh, that scene where Siddig is in the woods talking about how he's felt free for the first time hunting the deer.
Yeah.
He is going OTT there, yeah.
Also, watching all these priests together, it seems real gay. Just in general, like with their fancy dresses on.
Well, it's drag.
It feels, like...
You're wearing costumes and jewelry.
And the way they talk and all the like pomp and circumstance of everything.
With all this bullshit hierarchy of who gets to do what and why.
But that's just a side note. So when Sexy Priest shows up to talk to the nun, she speaks English, and he's like, "Oh, you speak English? I didn't know that." And she's like, "I don't. These babies in me are like allowing me to speak in English to you."
Dem babies.
I wrote down that this a cool movie would be Dem Babies, a Mariah Carey story. But that the babies are speaking through her, and they actually made her ask for him. That's why Sexy Priest is there, because she has requested him, because we've come to find out that he's part of this prophecy. There's a point where he yells, "It's not Christian," which makes me think of that one lady from Wife Swap who's screaming, "It's not Christian." I don't have a lot of notes. I didn't really.
Again, it was really after we get to Tallinn, it hits a wall.
It falls off.
And I wasn't really on this train joyfully to begin with. And then it's like, okay, we're in this cabin in the woods. And...
Well, things escalate very quickly because it opens with the bang. Then we see the priest get taken to the nun. And then we see the ritual with the goat sacrifice. And then Sexy Priest gets stabbed. So it just escalates very quickly, and they leave. And then, they're on the train going to Estonia. The nun has her babies. I thought that scene was a little crunchy.
I like when he's stabbed, he has the wherewithal to douse himself in antiseptic.
Once they get to the cabin in Estonia, I just felt real sleepy. But I guess I'm the one who wanted to watch this movie. And when I read the description, I was assuming we were going to get a movie where good and evil are battling. Like, maybe these babies are influencing people, like in The Omen, where they're influencing people to do bad things, but there's something to counterbalance that.
Or Village of the Damned.
Something. But we really don't. The babies seem inconsequential. We get a couple of scenes where someone looks at the babies and it's obvious mind control's happening, or
even though their eyes are not open.
Yeah, I don't there are rules with shooting with children, so maybe they had limited access to the babies, and that's why they're not in it a lot, and when they are, it seems like they're not really behaving the way they need to.
It shows the babies being born on this train, and they look very clean coming out of this woman. They're pristine. It was a pristine birth.
That's all I have.
Yeah, I mean, mostly.
Sorry to these people.
Well, not really. I mean, what was the inspiration? What were you trying to do with this film? What are you trying to say? What are you trying to add to this lore?
Yeah, I would be curious to hear the filmmakers talk about the film and what was the inspiration, because it just feels like...
Because I feel like if you have a limited budget, good storytelling is free. So what kind of choices were you allowed or not allowed to make? It just feels like...
It feels like someone wanted to make a movie and they got the resources and everything came together, and then it's like, oh, let's make a story around all of this.
But let's make it weird and subversive and do something kooky with the storytelling.
I agree.
This is very familiar. Come on.
What would you give Deliver Us?
1.5.
I would give it 1.5 out of 5. Yeah, I didn't care for this movie at all. Hit the thanks button. Listen to our podcast. Bye.